On Christmas Eve, a 14-year-old boy returned home in the cold snow, only to find he no longer had a home. His mother had vanished, without a note or a goodbye, leaving only a cruel message. "I have a real family now. Don't call again." 9 years later, that boy returns, not to seek forgiveness, but to make those who saw him as dead weight pay the price. But can revenge truly heal a heart that was abandoned? December 24, 2016. Detroit lay under a thick blanket of snow. Streetlights flickered through the wind, casting long shadows on quiet sidewalks. 14-year-old Eliot walked home from basketball practice, his breath forming soft clouds in the air. His sneakers crunched against the frozen pavement, and his duffel bag, slung over one shoulder, swung gently with each step. There was a tired kind of hope in his eyes, the kind only a kid could have on Christmas Eve. He turned the corner onto Maple Street and slowed his pace. The house was dark. The porch light wasn't on, the windows were unlit, and the driveway, usually covered with his mom's old sedan, was empty. Eliot stopped at the front door, frowning. Maybe she ran out to get food. Or was picking up a gift. Something. Anything. He tried the handle. But he knocked, waited. Then rang the bell. Nothing. Still clinging to hope, Eliot sat down on the top step. Snow fell softly, resting on his hood and eyelashes. His fingers were stiff with cold as he pulled out his phone. He dialed once. Then again. And again. Straight to voicemail. By the 6th call, his voice cracked as he whispered to himself, "She probably just forgot her phone." By the 10th he knew. She wasn't coming back tonight. But it wasn't just tonight, was it? An hour passed. Then another. Snow piled up around him. Eliot curled into himself, fighting the cold, and something deeper, a slow ache forming in his chest that had nothing to do with winter. Eventually, a car pulled up, headlights bright against the snow. It was Patrick, his neighbor, and Patrick's son Noah, Eliot's best friend. They had driven past and saw him curled up on the steps. "Jesus, Eliot," Patrick said softly, wrapping a coat around the boy's shaking shoulders. "Come on. Let's get you inside." That night, as the house across the street remained dark and silent, Eliot sat on Patrick's couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, eyes fixed on the floor. Just before midnight, his phone buzzed. It was his mother. He answered quickly, breath catching in his throat. Her voice was distant, flat, unfamiliar. "Eliot, grow up. I have a real life now. A real family. Stop calling me." Then silence. The line went dead. Number blocked. The next morning, someone showed Eliot a Facebook post. There she was, smiling wide on a yacht in the Maldives, champagne in hand. Beside her was Ronald Marks, a man Eliot had never seen, and 3 perfectly dressed kids. The caption read, "Real family. Real Christmas. No more dead weight." And that was the moment Eliot knew. He had been left behind. Not by mistake. Not by circumstance. But by choice. Ronald Marks was the kind of man who didn't ask for anything. He expected it. A real estate investor from Chicago with salt and pepper hair, expensive taste, and a calm, commanding presence. He had a pristine home in Lincoln Park, a weekend cabin in Aspen, and 3 children who attended private schools and spoke in polished, practiced tones. And he had Diane. She met Ronald at a charity fundraiser months before she left. At first, it was lunch meetings. Then weekends with friends. Eventually, it became something more, something intoxicating. Ronald offered her a version of life she had never known: yacht parties, designer dresses, summers in Europe, and people who sipped their wine slowly and never asked about the past. But Ronald didn't want her past. He didn't want Eliot. He made that clear. No teenage boy with old sneakers and public school manners was going to muddy his image of the perfect blended family. And Diane, chasing something she thought she deserved, agreed. Not directly. Not with malice. But with silence. With absence. With erasure. The heartbreak wasn't just that Diane left. It was that she never even tried to explain why. No message. No note. No visit. Just a cold voice over the phone and a Facebook post that made it seem like Eliot had never existed. It was as if she had edited him out of her story, replaced him with a better version of a family. For Eliot, the world went quiet after that. He barely spoke those first few weeks. At school, he kept his head down. At night, he stared at the ceiling, wondering if maybe he had done something wrong. Maybe he was too much. Too quiet. Too clingy. Too difficult. But Noah's family, they never let him fall too far. Patrick, a high school history teacher with a calm steadiness, handled the paperwork, getting Eliot enrolled under their address, calling social services, and ensuring his school records weren't lost. Noah's mother, Caroline, handled the warmth, cooking meals Eliot hadn't tasted in years, folding his laundry with care, and gently reminding him, day by day, that he was still wanted. Noah treated him like nothing had changed, like Eliot wasn't broken, or a burden, or someone to pity. When New Year's Eve came, they invited him to stay. The next year, and the one after that. Little by little, a new kind of family began to take root, not tied by blood, but by love that showed up when it mattered most. And for the first time in months, Eliot began to believe he hadn't been erased. He had simply been found again. 9 winters had passed since that night on the doorstep. The snow still fell each December, but life had moved forward, not healed completely, but reshaped itself into something stronger. At 23, Eliot lived alone in a modest apartment in Indianapolis. He had become an engineer, quiet, precise, and deeply focused. His walls were bare except for one photo, a grainy picture of him, Noah, and Patrick sitting on a porch swing, laughing over something none of them could remember anymore. His life wasn't glamorous, but it was his. Honest. Built from the ground up. Then, one morning in early January, a thick envelope arrived. No return address, just a clean stamp and his full name typed in crisp block letters. He almost didn't open it. It looked too official, too heavy with whatever it carried. Inside was a letter from a law firm in Ohio. We regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Harold E. Raines. As named in his final will and testament, you, Eliot James Morgan, are the sole inheritor of 18% ownership in Raines Metalworks, a privately held aluminum manufacturing company based in Toledo. He read it again. And again. His hands shook slightly. Harold Raines, his biological father. A man Eliot had never met, never even heard mentioned. Diane had always refused to speak of him, only once muttering that Eliot's real father didn't stick around either. Apparently, that wasn't entirely true. But what stopped Eliot cold was a single line in the attached documents. Primary supplier, Marks and Partners Investment Group. Ronald's company. The man who took everything from Eliot without ever speaking a word. The man who looked at him and saw nothing but inconvenience. Now, that same man's empire stood quietly, unknowingly, in part, under Eliot's influence. It was almost poetic, a silent thread of fate looping back after nearly a decade. Eliot didn't feel rage. Not exactly. It was something quieter, colder. Like standing at the edge of a frozen lake, knowing exactly where to step. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about finally being heard without having to raise his voice. Without shouting. Without pleading. Without asking anyone to care. Just quiet leverage. Eliot folded the letter, looked out the window at the falling snow, and whispered to no one. Let's see if they listen now. The boardroom was sharp with polished wood and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, a cold contrast to the storm building just outside the windows. Eliot sat near the far end of the long table, dressed in a tailored dark suit that felt slightly too stiff on his frame. He wasn't used to boardrooms. He wasn't used to power. But today he wore both like armor. Across from him sat executives, lawyers, and representatives from Marks and Partners. One of them, a man named Bryce, mid-50s with thinning hair and a carefully rehearsed smile, leaned forward to break the silence. We noticed a proposed 35% price increase on our aluminum supply. That has to be an error. Eliot didn't flinch. No error. Bryce chuckled nervously. That's not aligned with our preferential agreement. We've had discounted rates with Raines Metalworks for over 10 years. Eliot nodded slowly. That's exactly the problem. A discount that no longer makes sense. We've reassessed risk and adjusted pricing accordingly. Another executive, younger and more impatient, narrowed his eyes. You're new here. Maybe you don't understand how vital this relationship is to both companies. Eliot calmly reached for the small remote beside him. A click. The projection screen behind him lit up. An old Facebook post. Dated December 24, 2016. A photo of Diane and Ronald, smiling on a sunlit yacht, champagne glasses raised. Beside them, 3 teenagers Eliot had never met. The caption burned into the room. Real family. No more dead weight. The room fell into a silence so thick it almost hummed. Eliot turned to face the group, his voice steady but low. That dead weight is now adjusting your raw material pricing. No one spoke. Some shifted in their chairs. Bryce looked down. The younger executive's face flushed with confusion. Eliot didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He let the weight of those words settle in. 9 years of being forgotten, erased, rewritten, now reclaimed in a sentence. The board chair, an older woman with a quiet sense of control, glanced at Eliot for a long moment. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered, recognizing something the others hadn't yet processed. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. And Eliot, calm, polite, precise Eliot, wasn't asking for anything. He was simply delivering what had been long overdue. The news traveled fast, faster than Eliot expected. Within a week of the boardroom confrontation, whispers turned to headlines in certain corners of the investment world. Marx and partners, long considered unshakable, began showing signs of distress. Several of their mid-sized partners backed out of pending deals, citing material cost instability. Others paused negotiations entirely. It wasn't a collapse. Not yet. But the ice was definitely cracking beneath Ronald's empire. Eliot sat alone in his apartment one evening, sipping lukewarm tea, when the first email came in. The subject line was innocuous. Let's talk. He opened it. Eliot, I understand there's been tension. But I want to be clear, personal matters should never bleed into business. We've always conducted ourselves with professionalism, and I hope we can return to that standard. Let's find a path forward, privately and with mutual respect. There's no need for hostility. Call me Ronald Marx. It was signed off like a corporate memo. Cold, clipped, still clinging to control. But an hour later, a second email followed. This one longer, messy, no subject line. The words lacked structure, punctuation even. Ronald's voice was different now. You don't have to do this. Your mother, she's not the villain you think. We were trying to build something. I just didn't know how to include you, and by the time I thought about it, it was too late. Please, just don't destroy everything. You've made your point. Eliot read it once, then closed his laptop. He didn't reply. The next morning, a text message lit up his phone. From a number he hadn't seen in 9 years. Eliot, I miss you. I was wrong. It was Diane. Just words. Flat and late. There was no apology. No explanation. Just nostalgia, carefully packaged in a familiar voice. As if time could be rewound with a text. Eliot stared at the screen until it dimmed and went black. Then he did what he always did when the past tried to sneak back in. He worked. He began digging deeper into the company filings. What he found made his chest tighten. Marx and Partners had been bleeding money for years, barely masking it with complex, creative accounting. Without the discounted supplier contracts, especially the one from Rains Metalworks, they were dangerously exposed. 3 months, maybe less. That's all the time they had if things stayed on course. Eliot didn't smile. He didn't feel triumph. Just gravity. The quiet, heavy kind that comes with knowing that justice, when it finally arrives, is rarely loud. And almost never clean. Eliot sat on a park bench in Chicago's Lincoln Park, bundled against the wind. The trees had already shed most of their leaves, leaving the branches bare, like nerves exposed. Across from him sat Benji Marx, early 30s, jeans, hoodie, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers though he never brought it to his lips. They hadn't met before. But Eliot felt like he already knew him. There was a weight to Benji's presence, The kind that comes from surviving something no one sees. You're taller than I expected, Benji muttered with a wry smirk. Eliot gave a faint smile. You're quieter than I imagined. Benji looked away, exhaled hard. I used to talk a lot. Didn't help. For a few moments, they just sat there. The city hummed behind them, distant and unbothered. Then Benji spoke again, his voice lower, like it cost him something. My dad made Diane cut you out. I know that for a fact. Eliot didn't react. He'd suspected, but hearing it spoken aloud still landed like a cold stone in the chest. He said you'd confuse the narrative. Said his new life had no room for old baggage. Benji flicked ash onto the sidewalk. I know, because I was the first baggage he got rid of. Eliot turned to him, eyes narrowed. Benji nodded. I was 17. College-bound. Didn't fit the look. Too angry. Too mouthy. He told me to pack or get with the program. I packed. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through some photos, documents, mostly. Been keeping tabs on him ever since. Not out of spite. Just habit, I guess. Eliot looked down at his hands. Why are you helping me? Benji glanced over, almost surprised by the question. Because watching someone else go through what I did sucks. He leaned forward, tapping the phone. And because the truth needs sunlight. Their books are dirty, their deals shady. And now they're scared. Eliot studied the man beside him. Same bloodline, different paths. They weren't brothers, not by name, not by bond. But there was something shared. A grief. A quiet resilience. Benji took one last drag from his cigarette, crushed it underfoot. You're not crazy for wanting consequences, Eliot. You're just tired of pretending it didn't matter. Together, they began outlining how to anonymously leak key financial records to a few industry reporters, precise, clean, irrefutable. Not for vengeance, but for truth. For visibility. For the ones who were told they were too much, or worse, too inconvenient to love. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. The air was thick with roasted beans and uncomfortable silence. Eliot sat alone at a corner table, staring out the window as snow began to fall again, soft, unhurried. Then he saw her. Diane entered wearing a beige coat, her makeup carefully done, but her eyes tired, not from lack of sleep, but from years of emotional hiding. She clutched a leather handbag close to her chest like a fragile truth she wasn't ready to hand over. Eliot, she said, sitting down without waiting for a greeting. He didn't respond, didn't look at her. She reached into her bag and placed two items on the table, a folded document and a check. I spoke to Ronald, she began, voice calm but rehearsed. If you stop with this pricing nonsense, if you walk away, this is yours. She slid the check forward, $75,000. Next to it, an NDA. Eliot glanced at them. Not long. Just enough. Then he looked up. That's what I was worth to you? He asked, voice steady. $75,000? Her lip trembled. It's not like that. He leaned forward slightly. Then what is it like, Mom? She tried to hold eye contact but failed. Tears welled up as she pushed the words out. He made me choose, she whispered. I thought he'd change his mind. I thought I could fix it later. But Ronald said it was either him or you. And you chose him, Eliot said quietly. No hesitation. She covered her face briefly, shaking. I wasn't strong enough. I was scared. I was tired. Eliot cut in, not angry, but weary. You know what's funny, Mom? I was 14. I was scared. I was tired. I waited for you in the snow until midnight. And then I slept on a couch that didn't belong to me, for years. She cried harder now, truly breaking. He stood up slowly, gathering his coat. I don't want your money. I don't want your silence. I want you to live in the world you helped build. Diane looked up, desperate. Will this ever be okay? Eliot paused, his hand on the back of the chair. It's not about being okay. It's about consequences. And maybe for once, I'm not the one who has to carry them. And with that he walked out, leaving the check, the NDA, and the past behind. The boardroom at Marks & Partners was colder than usual, not in temperature, but in tone. Every executive was on edge. The hum of the projector was the only sound filling the silence as the screen flickered to life. Eliot stood at the head of the table, steady and unreadable. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The first image appeared, the infamous Facebook post from 9 years ago. Diane smiling on a yacht. Ronald with his arm around her. The caption read, "Real family, real love, real Christmas." The comment beneath it, Ronald's own, read simply, "No more dead weight." A ripple of discomfort spread around the room. No one looked at Ronald. Diane couldn't meet Eliot's eyes. Then came the financial report. Compiled with Benji's help, it revealed months of internal manipulation, numbers shuffled, debts buried, liquidity drained behind closed doors. The company was weeks from collapse. Gasps filled the room. "This," Eliot began quietly, "is the cost of vanity. Of building a castle on the bones of people you pretend don't exist." A senior board member cleared his throat. "What exactly are you asking for, Mr. Rhodes?" Eliot didn't hesitate. 1. Ronald Marks steps down as CEO, effective immediately. Ronald opened his mouth, but Eliot raised a hand, not to silence him, but to finish. 2. Both Ronald and Diane sign a formal, notarized public statement admitting they abandoned a child. That they regret it, and that the consequences belong to them. Ronald stood up now, voice tight. "This is absurd. You're using emotion to hijack a business. You think you're the only one who's suffered." Eliot looked at him, calm. "No. But I'm the only one who suffered in silence." He turned to the board. 3. Marks & Partners donates $2 million to national foundations that support abandoned and displaced children. No loopholes. No PR spin. Just action. Silence. Then murmurs. Heads nodding. Finally, the chairman spoke. "If we refuse?" Eliot closed his laptop. "Then I release the full report. All of it. To the press, to shareholders, to federal regulators." Ronald's face turned pale. Diane's hands trembled. "I won't ask again," Eliot said, then slid the documents forward. Diane picked up the pen first. She signed. Then, with tear-filled eyes, she looked at her son. "Is this enough, Eliot?" He took a deep breath. "This was never about being enough," he replied, voice soft but unyielding. "This was never about revenge. It's about accountability. About what it costs to throw your child away like yesterday's snow." He stood, buttoned his coat, and walked out, this time, not as a forgotten son, but as a man who made the silence speak. Snow was falling gently over Indianapolis, layering rooftops and trees with a quiet white stillness. Inside the house that had once been just Noah's, now felt fully like home. Eliot stepped into the warmly lit living room, the scent of cinnamon and pine lingering in the air. The Christmas tree stood tall in the corner, adorned with ornaments that spanned years, some handmade, some old and delicate, all full of meaning. He bent down and carefully placed a few small, neatly wrapped gifts beneath the tree. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful, honest. He looked up and caught a glimpse of himself in the glass window, not the boy who once stood outside in the cold, but a man who had chosen peace over revenge, truth over silence. Noah walked in, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Still can't believe how far we've all come," he said, handing one to Eliot. Eliot smiled, accepting it. "I can," he said, "because we made it happen." There was no phone on the table waiting to ring. No anxious glances at the door. This year, Eliot didn't hope for an apology, a text, or some sudden change of heart. He had stopped waiting for people who made a choice to leave. What remained, and who remained, was enough. As they sat together on the couch, Eliot pulled out his phone and typed a short message to Benji. "Merry Christmas. Let's start building that foundation. No kid should ever feel like we did." Benji replied within a minute. "I'm in. Let's make sure they're never forgotten." Eliot stared at the message for a while, his heart full, not of bitterness, but of quiet resolve. The world hadn't righted itself overnight, but he had learned something crucial. Closure isn't always given. Sometimes, it's built, piece by piece, year by year, until the past no longer has power over the present. He looked around. Patrick was setting the table. Noah's younger cousins were sneaking cookies. Laughter filled the house. Eliot stood, took a deep breath, and let it all in. He wasn't a forgotten child anymore. He was a man who knew where he belonged. And for the first time in a long time, Christmas didn't ache. It felt warm. It felt whole. Family, Eliot thought, isn't blood. Family is who stays when the snow falls. Family is who opens the door when the world shuts you out. And this year he was home. If you've ever experienced the feeling of abandonment or found your real family in the most unexpected way, share your story below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this video if it resonated with you. You are not alone, and your story could be a light for someone else.